case you just think it's like, you know, Michigan and Georgia, or, you know, these states that I mentioned that have the no compromise model, 85% of all pro-life legislation passed across the United States 2 years ago had no rape exceptions. 85% of all laws passed. So the fact that we see every piece of legislation coming out of Congress, like having a rape exception, is definitely problematic. And of course, for the, you know, the Republican Party, you know, the party platform is no exceptions.
Is there any legislation, are there any laws that protect the rights of fathers?
No.
Oh, unfortunately, no. And I'm a family law attorney, you know, so yeah, unfortunately, no.
Let me just mention one thing. When Kathy and I were up here, a meeting like this would have been half guys and half women. That's 1978, 1982. But I'm glad you're all here, ladies, but sometimes you got to get the guys who are LAs to be involved with this, you know, circumstance. And I would just echo two things that Rebecca said. I, at one point, had a bill that said we're not going to use tax money for morning after pills on college campuses, on state campuses. I got it past the House. The rape question came up. I beat it there. I anticipated this coming up in the Senate committee. I flew in a young woman who was in Rebecca's same circumstance. And I was getting the hell beat out of me by these staffers, including women. And I said, I waited. I said, you know what? Would you mind if I defer to this young lady here to answer the question? I said, okay, fine. And she talked kind of obliquely for about 2 minutes. And then she said, you see why I'm personally interested in Delegate Marshall's no exception is I was conceived by rape. And what Rebecca said is the entire place shuts down. Nobody wants to then confront the living person that they have been just excoriating and saying you're not worth living. And I said, she's here. Why don't you tell her her life is not worth living? Come on. You say you believe this. Tell her to her face what you just told me a few minutes ago.
Or people will say, well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're alive. Yeah, but if you had your way, I wouldn't. And then they say, well, that was your mother's choice. Like, good for her that she chose life. Well, no, she didn't choose life. That's not my story, you know? And you know, they'll say, well, I'm just saying I think it should have been her choice, but her choice would have been to abort. And then they're like, well, maybe she might not have, but she said she would have. And it's like, they're trying to move themselves away from accountability here.
Right.
You know, they don't want to be involved in this at all, but the fact is that legality matters. I was protected. And it's funny how, you know, when they are face to face, they'll try to distance it, but they really can't. And I'll challenge them. I'm a woman. Now tell me, what good is my right to anything as a woman if I don't have my right to life? And they can never answer that question. I think that we need to also equip you guys. One way to help your legislators too is if they could sponsor our bill from Hope After Rape Conception. This past session, one of the co-sponsors was actually Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And it's a pro-life bill in effect because it would provide for the termination of parental rights of men who rape, with a clear and convincing evidence standard with, you know, financial incentive to the states to get our law passed. So it's pro-life in effect, but, you know, if you're a 100% pro-life candidate, like, you should totally be behind that bill, because now you get a chance to show people that you really care about rape victims. And the majority of rape victim mothers are choosing life. And we have women who, whether they chose adoption or were choosing to parent, they had to fight their rapist for custody. And they had to drop their criminal prosecution in exchange for him dropping the custody case. That shouldn't have to happen. And so we need to get these laws passed.
Are you saying that rapists are claiming custody?
Oh, yeah. Get custody. Yes. Some of them get custody. Because if the girl's young, they say, well, I'm older, I can, you know, financially provide for this child. Yeah. And we have these kids, but the answer is not abortion. The answer is they need to be protected, and the laws need to be changed in our country. And the problem, if you read Shauna Pruitt's piece, she's active with us. She does a lot of Speaking for Right to Life in Michigan. We co-founded Hope After Rape Conception. I met her when I spoke on her campus at Georgetown Law School 7.5 years ago. She went to law school because of what was done for her, because she had to fight the rapist for custody and had to drop her criminal case. And she wrote this very important piece for the Georgetown Bar Journal on the rights of men who rape. And she explains how the rhetoric surrounding this abortion issue says that women like her don't exist. And that the reason why they're unprotected is because people don't believe them. That if you really were a rape victim, you would have had an abortion. And we had one of our young girls, she was 14, raped by an 18-year-old serviceman. And when she was prosecuting him, his attorney actually asked her, so you want the jury to believe that you were raped and you didn't choose abortion? Really? I mean, and this is the way that people think, that a true rape victim needs an abortion. A true rape victim couldn't possibly love the rapist baby. And so Shauna talks about how this pro-choice rhetoric hurts women like her and her child and leaves them unprotected. And so if you want to show you really care, you got to get this law passed. It's terrible. There was only one state, there were less than half the states provided for termination of parental rights of men who rape at all, but almost every state required a rape conviction. And you don't have to have a conviction for child abuse in order to terminate parental rights. You only need a showing of clear and convincing evidence. And you shouldn't have a tougher burden on rape victims. It should be the same standard, clear and convincing evidence. And so we need to get that law passed.
Rebecca, can you tell a little bit about your own story to put like a personal face on it? Maybe I know that you and your mother reconnected when you were a young woman, and that she was glad, even though she had tried, she was glad that she didn't have second violence in the sense of, I mean,
And she's come to hear me speak. We were interviewed in Glamour magazine together, and in Marie Claire magazine. Extra aired our story several years ago. And now she's really proud of me, and she's so glad that she couldn't abort me. I mean, she was forced to carry me. She was. And on my birthday last year, my grandmother died on my birthday. I was born on her anniversary. She died on my birthday. And my birth mother called me to wish me condolences. And we had a great heart-to-heart talk. We had been together to visit my grandmother recently. Actually, my birth mother and her husband legally adopted me 4 years ago. My adoptive family was dysfunctional, to say the least. And so they legally adopted me, which was really a fairy tale ending for me. I have 2 adopted children. I love adoption, but mine was just really screwed up. But I love life, even though I had been abused when I was younger. I'm very thankful for life. And nowadays it's so different too, because there's more screening and birth mothers get to pick, and we have an open adoption. It's very different nowadays. But anyhow, so my birth mother and I had this wonderful heart-to-heart. And then, and it had been it was 22 years after we met that she legally adopted me. We actually finalized it on her birthday, 22 years from the day we met on her birthday. And now it's been 26 years since we met. But so she called me, and we had this heart-to-heart. And I told her I was going to fly home to be with her because I was visiting my in-laws. And just before we got off, she was about to hang up, and she said, Rebecca, I just want to say, I'm so glad I had you. I'm like, wow, you know, on my 44th birthday. You know, she said that to me.
What a present.
It was the best birthday present ever. You know, this is several years before she was saying it was my body, my choice. It should have been my right. You know, years earlier she was seeking to kill me at the 2 back alley abortions. You know, and now she can say that. And when you can pass pro-life legislation, you know, just think about all of the other mothers who will now be able to say that to their children. I'm so glad I had you, because the government didn't pay for their abortion because they couldn't afford one. And now they can say, I'm so glad I had you. Or because they had to get parental consent first, and so they didn't go get one. Or because they were, you know, 22 weeks pregnant and they couldn't get one. And now they can say, I'm so glad I had you. There's real lives involved. And that's one thing that I hope that when we put faces to this issue, that you can remember that this is not just a theoretical exercise. When you've got this legislation in front of you, this is not a game. This is not just words. It's not just legislation. It's not just policy. There are real people that are going to be alive because of that. There's real moms who will be able to say that to their children because of what you're doing. And it really does matter. It really makes a difference.
Rebecca, aren't there women, though, there was at one time, that were connected with Dr. David Reardon and Elliott Institute, that there was an ad hoc committee of women that were pregnant by sexual abuse? And they all were angry at the pro-abortion lobby because they were using them and saying that these women needed to have abortion available to them under these circumstances. And they were angry. They said, we've already had one act of violence, and we want to keep our children. We want to keep our babies.
And they're tired of their children being demonized.
Pardon?
And they're tired of their children being demonized.
Are they?
I mean, gosh, there was the Bishop Morton. He actually renounced the Democratic Party, but he was talking about Republicans at a pastors' conference last year, a huge pastors' conference, and he said, oh, but you can take it too far. And he said, like the Republicans, you're really going to tell a woman who becomes pregnant from a demon seed? And he said, that you're going to make her carry a demon seed? And he said, and he said, that's not what God created. Really? So I'm Satan's child? Like, oh my gosh, that is so hurtful.
Yeah.
It's so hurtful. And then Sean Hannity. And I met Sean Hannity, and he said, oh, you're going to try to change my heart. He's like, oh my gosh. He's like, I heard about you. Oh my God. And he's like, okay. And then he finally said, all right, I'll have you on. I knew he wasn't going to have me on before the election was over. This is at the RNC at a Citizens United event. I was backstage, and David Bossy was introducing me to him from Citizens United. And anyhow, he never had me on, and 9 months later, he interviewed my friend Lila Rose, and on April 30th, 2013, on his radio program, you can listen to it, they're talking about this issue, and he says, I know I'm inconsistent, I know, blah, 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 and he said, and then he says, isn't that an evil seed?
What?
He said, I just think that's an evil seed. I just think that's an evil seed. And then he says, doesn't the Bible say that the sins of the father will be passed on to the child for like the third and fourth generation or something like that?
What did Lila
That
say?
was really hurtful.
Of course, horrible.
Yeah, she's like invoked my story before with others, but she didn't with him this time. But she kind of...
That's not the first, last, or only time that he has been misguided.
Yeah, but he got a caller who called in who was conceived and raped. He did have a caller call in, but the fact is that every time you have rape exceptions introduced, Chris Smith introduced a bill with the rape exception already in it. I mean, he didn't even try. It was the No Taxpayer Funding of Abortion Act. It was introduced with the rape exception already in it. And it hurts. It does serve to demonize, stigmatize, marginalize, discriminate against, saying that yours is not a life worth saving. You are less than. You're not as worthy as everybody else. You're not capable of feeling pain, or it doesn't matter. It's got to end.
Let me make a point. When I was up here, the House rules were interpreted that you could not require an administrative officer to engage in an additional discretionary act on an appropriation bill. So you really, parliamentary-wise, you couldn't have an exception for the life of the mother. So later on, the Rules Committee took to making an exception to the rules to allow that. I would urge your bosses, if you work for Republicans, to defeat the rule on that. Try to get a clean vote. When I did this in Richmond on a bill that was setting up these Obamacare exchanges, and it was from a Democrat senator from Fairfax. I put a no exceptions amendment on there, and I won. It went back to the Senate, and the senator pulled the bill rather than face a vote on that, because he knew once the vote was there, you either vote that up or you vote it down. They couldn't amend it. But what happened the next year is Bob McDonnell, our governor, with the help of the Right to Life group, devised a screwy set of exceptions. I voted president. I said, I cannot vote for this. I'm not going to vote against it and give aid and comfort to the abortionists, but I'm not going to vote for it and not do what I think is right. So you all need to push back a little bit, gently or prudently, or however you do it, for your bosses, and try to get them on the principled point. Even if you lose it, I mean, my thinking was in 1976, even if we lost a vote on this question, we at least got a record vote, and then you could fight on it from that point. So, I mean, that's my 2 cents on that.
As a policy matter, too, I want you to know how the Hyde Amendment is having reverberations, with the rape exception in it, it's having reverberations where it's really causing damage. First of all, with Obamacare. When they ended up, the Affordable Care Act, they ended up coming up with this settlement with our, the final vote. It had to do with our legislator from Michigan. I can't remember his name now.
Oh, you mean the Democrat? The guy who...
Yeah, from northern Michigan, and he's gone now.
It was a state. Right, I know.
Stupak, the Stupak Amendment. And he said that there'd be an executive order, which of course we know holds no weight, that by an executive order, that there would be no abortions. Of course, now there are. And so it's like, this is another example where the rape, incest, life of the mother was used to make all abortions to be paid for. So all abortions are going to be paid for, but it got passed by using the rape exception, under the guise of using the rape exception, and it made all abortions being paid for. And so, but what happened is that it was really frustrating because the news was like that this was a victory within the pro-life movement, and I knew it wasn't, because I knew executive order is a joke that holds no weight, and also that how damaging this rape exception is. And people in the pro-life movement said, they reported it in the news that there's no rape exception. And I said, that's a lie. I mean, they reported that there's going to be no funding of abortion. And I said, that's a lie, because it has rape. And then the response was, well, that merely incorporates the terms of Hyde. And so because of the rape exceptions in Hyde, which have been in place for the last 20 years, it's been more than 40 years since Hyde was passed with no exceptions. And I have a whole history of the Hyde timeline on Save the One's website. So if you want to get up to speed and understand the history of Hyde and the timeline and how it became a mandate and on states and everything, so that you had to fund in case I've got that whole history there as a timeline. And so what's happened now is that people just say, they just refer to Hyde. Well, it just has the exceptions. Like, it's just standard. Like Senator Portman was on my plane coming back from the RNC, and I asked him about this, and, are you 100% pro-life? And he said, well, with the exceptions. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What'd you say? And he said, well, with the exceptions. Like, and that's how it's stated. Like it's just standard. It's just standard. Of course, the exceptions. And so it's very damaging. So once you have it in one bill, then it just becomes like the standard template. And it's very frustrating to just be treated, just summarily dismissed. Like, this is my life that you're talking about. I heard that one congressman, that his wife knew my story, and he was upset. She was upset because she said, that I called him a name, or that I said he's not really pro-life. And I was talking to my friend saying, well, okay, so he's upset because I insulted him by saying he's not pro-life. What did he do to me? Like, he insulted my very existence. This is my very life. That just summarily dismissed it. Like, really, Although that's not how I normally communicate face-to-face with legislators. If I had said to Governor Perry, you're not really pro-life, he would have slammed the door shut on me. So when I'm face-to-face, I do try to be far more diplomatic than that. But I was very frustrated after these bills were passed, and I tweeted that out, and apparently they realized it. So I wouldn't recommend going up to people and saying, you're not really pro-life, because that's obviously not going to be helpful. But so then the other way that it's hurt is that when I testify across the country on personhood measures, personhood amendments, on abortion bans, And state to state, this issue has come up where we had state legislators, in Montana and in Louisiana, many other states where, by the way, they didn't think they had enough votes to get out of committee. But not only did they have enough votes to get out of committee after I testified, they had pro-choice legislators completely change their mind and turn around and vote for 100% pro-life measure. So you can change hearts and minds. Most people have never really thought this thing through. But what happens is that every time it gets to the floor of the House or Senate, and then the Office and Budget Committee comes in and says, you can't pass this bill without exceptions because of Hyde. Because Hyde, we're under court order, and we will lose potentially millions of dollars in Medicaid funding if we pass something like this. Or, we'll get sued. And so the bill gets killed because of Hyde, because of the Hyde exceptions. And so that's how insidious it is.
You really need to push back because we are stuck in the states. It's now a mandate. It wasn't even, I guess you could permissively fund it in the late 70s, but there was no requirement to do it. And like I say, the original Hyde Amendment, no exceptions.
It was Bill Clinton's letter to HHS. It wasn't even like an executive order or anything like that. It was a simple letter to HHS. And that letter was taken, and then they took it to court, and now states are under court order that they have to fund in cases of rape, incest, life of the mother.
Let me tell you how to get a vote on that. Simply have one of your bosses draft an amendment in the House to suspend implementation of the Bill Clinton letter or policy. Get a vote on that. And you can do it even if it's not allowed by the rule. You defeat the motion to rise, you come back, you vote on that question. You need to get rid of this to get us back to a principled position. A principled position is the one of strength. Can you imagine Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks saying, blacks can sit anywhere in the bus except if you're going to this particular suburb of Birmingham? They would never have done that.
Yeah, can you imagine if there was a rape exception in cases of biracial rape? And I've heard people talk about this, and it's a big deal like in the South.
That was Mississippi's law in 1960.
Yeah, and so in cases of biracial rape, can you imagine the national outcry from civil rights leaders? How dare you discriminate, right? And yet people think nothing of discriminating against a child conceived in rape. But it is discrimination. It is. It's got to end. But we're never going to have Roe v. Wade overturned. We're never going to get a challenge to Roe v. Wade unless we get rid of the Hyde exceptions. And the mandate within the Hyde exceptions has got to go first. That Bill Clinton letter to HHS. And all the procedural stuff that you were talking about is like over my head. But I know it's got to go.
Right, you just have to get an amendment to suspend the use of any money, and it's probably on the HHS Appropriations Act, to do that. Let me tell you what I did when I was working for Bob Dornan. I went down to, we call it legislative drafting. I forget the term. But I drew an amendment, what is it called?
Ledge Council.
Ledge Council. I drew an amendment up on the Judiciary Appropriations Act. And this was when the Harris case was pending on challenging the Hyde Amendment. And what I said was, no money for any justice but the clerk. And the legal counsel there says, what? I said, yeah. I said, if they decide that Congress has to fund abortion, we're taking away their clerks. They have too much time on their hands. And the lawyer said, can I talk about this? I first said I want it kept secret. I really wanted him to talk and call the clerks over at the Supreme Court. I think he did that. And as a matter of fact, the tactic of the money is the most powerful. The reason I know it is because when one day Dornan and myself were in a conference, Charlie Rangel was on the Democrat side. He came up to us and said, hey, you guys know that I differ with you on abortion. But let me tell you what, if the court had said, they're going to take our money, it's not Congress's money, it's the people's money, but Charlie Rangel's telling me and Congressman Dornan this, if the court had dared, and he opposed the Hyde Amendment, if the court had dared to say, they're telling us how to spend it, I would have put in court-stripping bills faster than you. So when you go with the appropriations power of Congress, you pull in people who otherwise may have a difference with you because they see their power of the purse being abolished, being eroded, being taken away. And if it's one thing that congressmen cannot do without, it's at least formal power over the purse. Your strength is in the money and tying these amendments to the money. I urge you to be creative and think about this.
If you Google conceived in rape, pregnant by rape, my website's #1, so it's like super easy to find me. If you're into like philosophical stuff, my philosophical abortion essay has been ranked #1 for like 15 years. So, you know, there's some interesting stuff if you're like really into the philosophy behind it. But, and then I kind of apply some legal concepts to, you know, like the idea of safe harbor doctrine. I'm sorry, safe harbor doctrine, if any of you are in law school or attorneys, you know. Just want to be a resource again, so thank you.